Raiders have now agreed to terms with Super Bowl winning head coach Pete Carroll.
And the Raiders have chosen Pete Carroll. He's an adult and the organization needs one. I like the choice.
Pete Carroll has been named the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. This seems like the worst kept secret in football over the last few days.
They have issues at quarterback. They need one. But no one is better at fixing a culture, getting a place headed in the right direction than Pete Carroll.
Listen, I think Pete's an amazing football coach. I think he's an amazing individual.
The Raiders have made a huge decision by signing Pete Carroll as their head coach. But what happens next with the quarterback position? And will this hire ultimately work out for the Las Vegas Raiders franchise? Remember, Pete Carroll was pushed out of the Seattle Seahawks organization as their head coach, and he had an emotional goodbye in his press conference in January a year ago in 2024.
I've been blessed with like the rarest of best friends and mentor, loving partner, the angel in my life. This is worth crying for. Glenda, nobody would ever understand how significant she had been through all of the stuff that we've been through, and how important she is. As she's just been the angel in my life, and I owe you everything.
This was an emotional moment for Pete Carroll as he thanked his wife and his family in what he probably thought at the time was his final press conference in his NFL career as he was pushed out of the Seattle Seahawks organization. The truth of the matter was the Seahawks did decline significantly ever since the Legion of Boom years with players like Richard Sherman, Marshawn Lynch, and of course, Russell Wilson. Actually, Pete Carroll and the Seattle Seahawks have only had one playoff win since the 2018 season. So in order to save face and to thank the guy who has given the Seahawks their only Super Bowl championship in the history of the franchise, Pete Carroll, they decided to say that they split amicably and Pete Carroll was actually not removed as the head coach, but moving to a different role. But the truth of the matter is, Pete Carroll at the time did not support this move and wanted to coach again. You had reports by former players of Pete Carroll, like Richard Sherman, saying they think Pete still wants to coach again, and it looks like he was lurking in the background for the perfect opportunity the whole time. Despite the lack of playoff success for Pete Carroll in his latter years with the Seahawks, players love this guy and he seemed to have a lot of energy for being a 73-year-old man. Remember how he welcomed DK Metcalf when he first joined the Seahawks?
Hey, make sure you get that on film now. Make sure you get that on film. Pretty good. Looking pretty good right there.
And look, no homo, bro, but I hope my body looks that good when I'm in my 70s. Thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Underdog, where you can win money on sports. Underdog is one of the fastest growing fantasy apps in the industry. I especially love their pick'em game where you can pick your favorite players around the league, guess the higher or lower stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. You can win up to 1,000 times your money in one night. I especially like doing this for a game that I'm not emotionally invested in. I can just make my picks, sit back, and watch them hit. Now that it's the playoffs right now with a few games left, you definitely got to get your picks in soon and start playing now. Check out this map right here to see if Underdog is available in your state. It's available in California, Oregon, and Texas, where I know a lot of you are from. If you use my promo code Wi-Fi, you can get a free pick plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash for first-time players. So visit UnderdogFantasy.com, find the app in the Google or Apple store, and use my promo code Wi-Fi to claim a free pick plus get up to $1,000 in bonus cash for first-time players. What are you waiting for? The link is in the pinned comment and description below. Check out Underdog right now. Raiders fans did get some blue balls as the NFL media world said that they were set to land the hotshot head coaching candidate Ben Johnson thanks to Tom Brady having a minority role with the Raiders organization. That turned out to be false as Ben Johnson accepted the job with the Chicago Bears to be their head coach. So then, after that, Pete Carroll, the top candidate available outside of Mike McCarthy, the former Dallas Cowboys head coach, he officially became hired as the Raiders head coach as of January 24th, 2025. He is having a 3-year contract with a 4th-year option, meaning that Pete Carroll could be 78 years old while coaching the Raiders. He is going to turn 74 at the start of the season in 2025. Carroll joins the AFC West division with tons of famous coaches who are all up there in age, but Pete Carroll is now the oldest active head coach in the NFL and perhaps the oldest in NFL history. Sean Payton, Andy Reid, Jim Harbaugh, Harbaugh and now Pete Carroll are all in the AFC West. It's going to be interesting to see how the rivalry plays out between Pete Carroll and Jim Harbaugh. These guys butted heads in college when Pete Carroll was at USC while Harbaugh was at Stanford.
Jim Harbaugh will come to the center of the field to meet Pete Carroll, who is not a happy camper, no question about it.
They don't seem very happy with each other.
It'd be interesting. They said nice game. Well, I'm sure it was said behind clenched teeth.
These two continued their rivalry in the NFL, in the NFC West specifically, while Harbaugh was with the 49ers and Pete Carroll was with the Seattle Seahawks. I wonder if Pete Carroll took this job just to get back at Harbaugh and go head-to-head again with him in the AFC West. What will the Raiders and Carroll now do at the quarterback position? Former Seahawks quarterback and teammate of Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, recently was asked about Pete Carroll and him potentially landing the Raiders job.
His name is now being floated back into head coaching cycles. People are saying potentially Las Vegas Raiders for Pete Carroll. What was it like working with Pete? How would you describe your relationship with Pete? And have you caught up with him since you have left Seattle Seahawks?
Listen, I think Pete's an amazing football coach. I think he's an amazing individual. I've been fortunate to play for two really special coaches in terms of men and how they think and how they process the game. Obviously, and Coach Pete Carroll and obviously Coach Mike Tomlin are really unique individuals and how they lead and motivate. I think they're...
People have often wondered, are Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson still on good terms after having all that success together with the Seattle Seahawks, but ultimately things fizzled out and Russell moved on and joined the Denver Broncos? There were reports emerging when Russell Wilson had his fallout with the Seattle Seahawks that he wanted Pete Carroll out and was actually trying to get Pete Carroll fired, and the Seahawks essentially decided to choose Pete Carroll over Russell Wilson just to move on from Pete Carroll over a season later. Carroll decided to roll with Geno Smith as his quarterback, and they did have some success together and surprised a lot of people in the NFL.
They wrote me off. I ain't right back, though. That's the problem. I ain't right back. Let's go.
What's interesting is as soon as Pete Carroll was hired by the Raiders, you had Geno Smith post on Instagram a picture of him and Pete Carroll, more on him potentially joining the Raiders in a little bit. But until Pete Carroll was essentially fired by the Seattle Seahawks, we still thought that Russell Wilson and him were on bad terms. But it turns out that Carroll and Russell Wilson have put their past behind him as Russell Wilson showed up to the party that the former Seahawks players and coaches had with Pete Carroll after he was removed as their head coach. It seems like the two guys are still on great terms, and you had Russell Wilson, like we showed you earlier, speak very positively of the head coach on the Pat McAfee show. Russell Wilson is set to be looking for a job in 2025. He is going to be a free agent, and it doesn't seem like he'll have many opportunities, and if the Raiders job is there, he'll likely take it. As soon as Pete Carroll was hired, you had Peter Schrager of Good Morning Football say, "Thoughts, Raiders fans," and post a picture of Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll together. And Ian Rappaport, one of the top NFL insiders in the entire world, said that Russell Wilson wanted to go to the Raiders last season. Remember, he was only a 1-year veteran minimum contract while the Denver Broncos paid the rest of the tab. The Raiders decided to go with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell for the 2024 season rather than sign Russell Wilson to join the Raiders in 2024. Could he be back with Pete Carroll? It is also important to remember that Russell Wilson was a third-round pick in 2012, and Pete Carroll was able to turn him into a franchise quarterback. Even if the Raiders do not decide to go with a veteran like Russell Wilson, could Pete Carroll do that again? Could he find a day 2 pick in the NFL draft in 2025 and turn that young player into a franchise quarterback? Could he do that with somebody like Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe, who will likely be a second or third round pick in this upcoming draft? Even if the Raiders do decide to draft a quarterback, Russell Wilson on a 1-year deal could serve as a good bridge. But Pete Carroll did have a good relationship with Geno Smith, who has been struggling out there with the Seattle Seahawks due to their shakeup on their offensive line and some of the limited pieces that they have on the defensive side of the ball. The Seahawks are in a position where they can move on from Geno Smith and save a ton of cap space. They will probably be looking in a different direction for their quarterback position unless they decide that Geno Smith is truly the guy. But because Russell Wilson will be cheaper and maybe the Seahawks want to keep that continuity with Geno Smith, he is more likely going to be the Raiders quarterback in 2024 2025, you have Bovada and all the markets out there predicting that the Raiders are the favorite to sign Russell Wilson if he does leave the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think he is going to leave the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think they're going to offer him another contract. They had Justin Fields there in the background learning the offense. I think the Steelers are set to go with Fields, and Russell Wilson will be desperate looking for a job in 2025. Pete Carroll is a defensive-minded head coach. He started out as a defensive backs coach in the NFL, became the Jets defensive coordinator, so he will be needing to hire a hotshot offensive coordinator candidate. He could go with the recently fired Shane Waldron, who got canned by the Chicago Bears while he was working with Caleb Williams, and this guy had experience working with Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson out there in Seattle. The Raiders desperately need to be competitive in the AFC West. Maybe Pete Carroll is enough, but they still lack significant talent on the offensive side of the football, especially at the quarterback position, and it does seem unlikely that Pete Carroll and the Raiders in just 1 year can totally change everything, find their franchise quarterback at the same time, and then outplay the Chiefs, the Broncos, and the Chargers, all of which who made the playoffs in 2024. So the Raiders will have to have patience with Pete Carroll, and that is probably why he has a 3-year contract, potentially a 4-year contract, because Tom Brady and Mark Davis know that this will take some time for them to be competitive. But if Pete Carroll finds a way to turn the Raiders around in 1 year, just like Harbaugh and Sean Payton, without a clear-cut franchise quarterback, then he will put a stamp on his legacy to be one of the greatest head coaches in NFL history. Can he prove everybody wrong?